Medieval peasants ate over 200 distinct foods throughout the year. The average modern American eats fewer than 20 different foods regularly. And almost everything that disappeared from your plate in the last 100 years disappeared for exactly one reason. Not because it was unhealthy, because it could not be owned, patented, or sold back to you at a profit. These are the 7 most powerful foods in human history, and big agriculture made sure you forgot they existed. We are going to go through all 7, but I need you to stay with me until number 4, because by the time we get to number 4, you're going to understand why your grocery store looks exactly the way it does, and it has nothing to do with what's healthy, safe, or what your body actually needs. Number 4 is the one they worked hardest to replace, and once you understand it, the entire modern food system suddenly begins making perfect sense. Before we get to the list, you need to understand what actually happened to the food supply, because this was not an accident. It was not natural progress. It was not driven by food nutrition science. The modern food system did not only remove these foods from your plate, it replaced them with cheaper, more addictive, and less nutritious alternatives and called it an upgrade. It handed you a product that could be manufactured in a factory, shipped across a continent, stored for 18 months, and sold at a margin that would have been unimaginable to any farmer who ever lived. And then it told you that it was better. You didn't choose this. It was chosen for you. Before you were born, corporations decided what would grow, what would ship, and what would sit on your shelf. Those decisions were made in boardrooms and not kitchens. They were made by shareholders, not doctors. Your diet was engineered around logistics and profit before you were even old enough to choose for yourself. These 7 foods never made the cut, not because they failed, but because they could not be controlled. What medieval people understood, not intellectually but practically, by hard daily necessity, is that food had to earn its place at the table. Every item served a function, every ingredient either built the body or protected it. There was no budget for food that did neither. There was no room on the plate for something that existed purely to generate profit for someone who would never eat it. That understanding did not disappear because science improved. It disappeared because it was inconvenient for the people trying to sell you something. Here are the 7 foods they buried. For roughly 1,000 years, lard was the primary cooking fat across Europe. It wasn't butter, it wasn't olive oil, it was lard. Medieval households rendered it from pork fat, stored it through the winter, and used it for everything from frying to pastries to preserving meat. Monastery records from the 12th century at abbeys, including Cluny in Burgundy, document lard as a staple provision, listed alongside things like grain and salt as a foundational supply. This was not desperation food, this was the cooking fat of choice across every class because it worked and it kept people nourished through conditions that would break most modern people by Tuesday. Then, in the early 20th century, Procter & Gamble needed somewhere to put the excess cottonseed oil that was produced by their soap manufacturing process. The result became Crisco, and it launched in 1911, the first industrially produced solid vegetable shortening. The marketing campaign that followed would be one of the most effective in food history. Lard was repositioned as dirty, unhealthy, and old-fashioned, while Crisco was made to be clean, modern, and scientific. A product that did not exist before 1911 replaced a fat that had sustained European civilizations for a millennium in less than 2 decades. Modern research has not been kind to that decision. A 2020 analysis published in the journal Nutrients confirmed that lard contains approximately 40% monounsaturated fat, the same category as olive oil, alongside fat-soluble vitamins including D, E, and K2. It has a smoke point of around 375 degrees Fahrenheit, higher than most vegetable oils used in commercial cooking. Industrial seed oils are significantly higher in omega-6 polyunsaturated fats, which are more chemically unstable under high heat and remain heavily debated in modern nutrition research regarding their long-term inflammatory effects. Lard could not be patented, but Crisco could. One of those 2 facts determined what ended up in your kitchen. Lard has a higher smoke point than most vegetable oils and sustained European cooking for 1,000 years. It was replaced not by something better, but by something that could actually be owned. Raw milk was not a medieval luxury. It was the baseline. Every village that kept a cow had access to raw milk, and across Europe that milk was consumed fresh, cultured into butter, and aged into cheeses whose complexity modern commercial dairies cannot approach. The unpasteurized cheeses of medieval France and England, documented in market records and monastic accounts from the 13th and 14th centuries, contain living bacterial cultures that modern food science is only beginning to fully map. Pasteurization arrived in the late 19th century as a genuine public health response to the unsanitary conditions of industrial urban dairies. That context matters. The problem was not raw milk. The problem was raw milk produced in crowded, unclean facilities with no refrigeration and sold in cities to people who had no means of verifying its source. Pasteurization solved that specific problem, but what it also did as a side effect was destroy the living enzymes and bacterial cultures that make raw milk nutritionally distinct from its heated version. A 2011 study published in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, involving over 8,000 children across 5 European countries, found that children who consumed raw farm milk had significantly lower rates of asthma and allergies compared to children consuming commercially pasteurized milk. The researchers identified whey proteins and bioactive compounds destroyed by pasteurization as the likely protective factors. Raw milk today is illegal to sell in most U.S. states, a food consumed by every human society that kept livestock for the entirety of recorded history until roughly 1900, is now a controlled substance in many jurisdictions. It cannot be industrialized, it cannot be shipped at scale, it cannot be produced in a facility processing 10 million liters a day. Those three realities are aligned extremely well in an industrial dairy system built around scale, shelf life, and centralized processing. Raw milk contains enzymes and bioactive compounds that pasteurization destroys entirely. Once they are gone, they are gone. The heating process that extended shelf life also ended the nutritional conversation. Every medieval kitchen ran on bone broth. This is not a figure of speech. The pot that hung over the fire in a medieval household was not emptied and washed between meals. Bones from every animal butchered went in, vegetable scraps went in, the broth simmered continuously, drawn from as needed, replenished as available. Medieval hospitals, documented in records from institutions, including a hotel in Paris, which operated continuously from the 7th century, used bone broth as the primary recovery food for patients who were ill or wounded. It was not one treatment option among several. It was the foundation of recovery nutrition across the medieval medical world. Modern food science has spent 20 years confirming what medieval cooks knew by practice. Bone broth produced by long simmering of bones and connective tissue is rich in collagen, gelatin, glycine, proline, and glucosamine. A 2017 study published in the journal Sports Medicine found that collagen supplementation, delivering the same amino acid profile as bone broth, significantly improved joint pain in athletes and accelerated recovery from connective tissue injury. A 2012 study published in the journal Chest found that chicken bone broth reduced the migration of inflammatory compounds associated with upper respiratory infections, providing a biological mechanism for the folk observation that has existed across virtually every human culture simultaneously. Bone broth disappeared from the modern food supply for one reason: you cannot manufacture it efficiently at industrial scale. The simmering time required, a minimum of 12 hours for meaningful collagen extraction and up to 48 hours for maximum yield, is compatible with the throughput demands of industrial food production. The solution the food industry landed on was bouillon cubes and flavored powder, products that deliver sodium and the suggestion of broth without a single one of the nutritional compounds that had made the original worth eating. They kept the name and removed everything the name meant. Food number 4 is the one I told you about at the start. This is why your grocery store looks exactly the way that it does. Organ meats, liver, heart, kidney, tongue, spleen, and lung, were not poverty food in the medieval world. They were priority food, and when an animal was butchered, the organs were eaten first because it was understood that they were the most valuable part. Medieval royal banquets documented across English and French court records from the 13th century through the 15th list liver, kidney, and heart as centerpiece dishes, not offcuts. The nobility ate organ meats because organ meats were worth eating. The logic was direct and correct. Modern nutritional analysis has confirmed what medieval people understood intuitively. Beef liver contains roughly 10 to 100 times more micronutrients by weight than the equivalent portion of muscle meat. A single 100-gram serving of beef liver provides more than 700% of the recommended daily intake of vitamin B12, over 600% of vitamin BA, more than 100% of folate, copper, and riboflavin, and significant quantities of iron, zinc, and other elements. A 2021 review published in the journal Nutrients confirmed that organ meats represent the most nutrient-dense animal foods available, with liver specifically identified as exceeding muscle meat across virtually every micronutrient category measured. So then, why are they gone? Organ meats do not ship well. Muscle meat holds its texture and appearance through refrigerated transport and extended shelf life. Organs are physiologically active tissue. They degrade faster, they look confronting to a consumer who did not grow up around them, they require a cooking relationship that modern food systems cannot package and sell at margin, and so the most nutritious part of the animal became the cheapest part at the supermarket when it appears at all because the food industry optimized for what could be processed and sold at profit. Your body is the thing that lost. The modern food system took the most nutrient-dense foods humans ever ate, turned them into scraps and pet food, then convinced you that muscle meat was the premium product. Medieval people did not have a health insurance system. They could not afford to be sick. A peasant who lost 2 weeks to illness in harvest season lost the food that would carry his family through winter. A soldier who went down with fever did not get sick leave. The economic cost of illness was immediate, personal, and potentially fatal. So, medieval people built their diet like a fortress. Every food had to earn its place at the table. Nothing was on the plate because a marketing campaign had run long enough. What you eat is either an investment in your body or a tax on your future. And the food industry made this choice for you across the 20th century. Medieval people fermented constantly and not as a hobby. Fermentation was preservation technology in a world without refrigeration, and it produced something the medieval digestive system depended on that the modern one is increasingly desperate for: kvass, a fermented grain drink consumed across Eastern Europe from at least the 9th century, documented in Primary Chronicle of Rus from 1056. Kefir, consumed across the Caucasus and documented in the Ottoman records from the 13th century. Lacto-fermented vegetables, prepared by every culture in Northern Europe, as a standard winter food supply. These were not health products, they were dinner. The human gut microbiome, now one of the most intensively studied areas in medical research, depends on regular intake of live bacterial cultures to maintain the diversity associated with immune function, mood regulation, and metabolic health. A 2021 study published in the journal Cell, conducted by researchers at Stanford University, found that a diet high in fermented foods significantly increased microbiome diversity and reduced markers of inflammation, with results measurable within 10 weeks. The opposite pattern, high in processed food, produced microbiome depletion within the same period. Pasteurization killed fermented food as a commercial category. A product containing live bacterial cultures that continue to develop over time cannot be standardized, cannot be given a reliable shelf life, and cannot be manufactured at industrial throughput. The food industry replaced living fermented food with pasteurized imitations that carry the label and none of the biology, meaning that modern supermarket fermentation is often fermentation without life. Your supermarket yogurt was heated after fermentation. The cultures that did survive, if any, are a fraction of what a traditionally fermented product contains. They kept the branding, they removed the point. The bread your medieval ancestor ate would not be recognized by the wheat plant your flour comes from today. Einkorn, emmer, and spelt, the grains cultivated across Europe from the earliest agricultural settlements through the medieval period, are genetically distinct from the dwarf wheat varieties that replaced them during the Green Revolution of the mid-20th century. Medieval einkorn cultivation is documented across archaeological sites throughout Central Europe, dating from 7500 BCE continuously through the 14th century. Spelt is recorded in crop registers from monastic estates across Germany and Switzerland through the 15th century. These were the foundation of the European diet for thousands of years. Modern dwarf wheat was engineered for yield. It produces more grain per acre than heritage varieties, which is why it replaced them. What it was not engineered for was nutrition, digestibility, or the preservation of the gluten structure that heritage grains contain. A 2017 study published in the journal Nutrients found that einkorn wheat produced significantly lower inflammatory responses in participants with non-celiac gluten sensitivity compared to modern wheat varieties, which researchers attributing the difference to the distinct protein composition of the ancient grain. A 2014 study in the same journal found that einkorn bread produced a lower glycemic response than modern wheat bread, attached for carbohydrate content. Heritage grains were not replaced because they were inferior. They were replaced because they were not productive enough for an agricultural system optimizing for yield and margin per acre. Einkorn yields roughly a third of what modern dwarf wheat produces. It cannot be harvested efficiently by the same machinery. It has not been engineered to accept the same chemical inputs. It is, in every commercial sense, inconvenient. In every nutritional sense, it is superior. That tension was resolved in favor of the people selling the wheat, not the people eating the bread. Dandelion was listed in the official British Pharmacopoeia as a medicine until 1930. Then it was reclassified as a weed. That single fact is all you need to understand about what happened to this entire category. Medieval gardens grew herbs as food, not decoration. The physical gardens attached to every major monastery across Europe, documented in records from institutions including Fontenay Abbey in Burgundy and the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland, whose garden plan from 820 CE survives in full, grew elderberry, nettle, dandelion, and yarrow as provisions alongside vegetables and grain. These were not fringe remedies, they were dietary staples with documented medicinal application, used daily in cooking as a normal part of the food supply. Elderberry contains flavonoids, ones that modern research have confirmed to be measurable in antiviral and immune-modulating properties. A 2016 randomized controlled trial published in Nutrients found that elderberry supplementation actually reduced the duration of colds in air travelers by an average of 2 days. Nettle is one of the most mineral-dense plants available, and it contains iron, calcium, magnesium, and vitamins A and C and K in concentrations that exceed most cultivated leafy greens. A 2013 study published in the African Journal of Pharmacy and Pharmacology documented nettle's anti-inflammatory properties and its established use as a dietary staple across multiple traditional food cultures. These plants were removed from the food supply not because research discredited them. The research consistently supports them. They were removed because they grow wild, cannot be patented, cannot be owned by a seed company, and cannot generate recurring revenue. A plant that grows in your garden, in a roadside verge, or in a field margin, and that you can harvest, dry, and use yourself as a plant that will never generate a shareholder return. The reclassification of medicinal food plants as weeds or as supplements requiring retail purchase was the logistical endpoint of a food system built around ownership and margin rather than nutrition and health. Every food that I covered today shares something in common. They were whole, unprocessed, impossible to patent, impossible to control at scale. Medieval people did not eat this way because they were health conscious. They ate this way because it was the only way available. The food was what the land produced, what the animal provided, and what fermentation and time transformed. There was no manufacturing layer between the source and the plate. We traded that necessity for convenience. We traded food that healed for food that sells. We were told the trade was progress, and now we are the sickest, well-fed population in human history. Chronic disease rates in the developed world have no precedent in any human society that was not also facing famine. We're overfed and undernourished simultaneously, which is a condition that did not exist before the industrial food system created the conditions for it. The people who made those decisions are not eating what they sell to you. These 7 foods did not disappear because they failed. They disappeared because they could not make anyone rich. Lard could not be patented. Raw milk could not be industrialized. Bone broth could not be standardized. Organ meats could not be packaged. Fermented food could not be stabilized. Heritage grain could not be scaled. Medicinal herbs could not be owned. 7 different foods, 1 identical reason. Every time you bring one of these foods back into your life, you are reversing a century of industrial food logic designed to separate people from the things that kept humans healthy for thousands of years. You are refusing the system they built for you. Subscribe and let us keep digging up what they buried.